Hi everyone, Timothy Ferris here with a few words about what I'm going to call interstellar homesteading. This is an approach through which humans might well expand from our solar system to nearby systems of other stars and ultimately on across at least our part of the Milky Way galaxy. To contrast a point of the spear exploration with what I'm calling interstellar homesteading, let me discuss two campaigns of exploration with great consequences that occurred here in North America. The first occurred some 15,000 years or so ago, when humans who had been living on and near the Bering Straits made their way down through what is now Canada and the US, pretty much as soon as the polar ice cap of the most recent ice age had withdrawn sufficiently to open up these lands to habitation. There's evidence that people have been living in the Bering Strait area for some time, but for whatever reasons it became plausible for them to find their way south to the plentiful lands of the Americas. The tip of the spear type explorers in that movement appear to have made their way down all the way to the tip of South America quite a bit more quickly than would be the case if they were, let's say, just killing all the mammoths for food and then moving on. And some scholars believe that this was made possible by maritime travel, that they used the Pacific Ocean to navigate the treacherous coasts of North America and on down, and that may well have been the case. But the reason that we know about all this is that those initial explorations were followed much more slowly, but also more surely, by waves of habitation, homesteading. There were people living in villages almost on the edge of the receding ice cap, and as I've discussed in another lecture in this series, the myth of Noah and the earth being inundated in a flood, a myth that shows up in various cultures all over the world, most likely came from the experiences of the late ice age, when the ice would melt, but you'd have these ice dams that were still holding up the water. When they collapsed, you'd have a sudden flood that would simply wipe out whole villages miles below, and to the inhabitants of those villages that would appear as if the entire world had been inundated by flood. But of course they persevered, and when the tip of the spear style expedition of Christopher Columbus reached North America, Columbus and his crew found not an uninhabited land, but a land containing humans that had been there for well over 10,000 years. In both cases, I expect humans were pushing the limits of their technology, particularly if the original settlers made their way down by boat, which would have been very dangerous, but also bigger payoff. Columbus was only days away from a mutiny by his crew. I think as a journeyman mariner, he had heard a lot of stories, both in the Mediterranean and then when he was in Ireland, about signs that there was a landmass, a reachable distance if you sailed west. And although he tried to theorize when he was fundraising about the size and shape of the earth, which everyone understood to be spherical, by the way, I don't think that was really what Columbus was inspired by. Rather, it was other mariners giving him solid evidence to indicate that if he persevered in sailing west, he could make it. But he was pushing the technology about as far as it could go. Now, Columbus didn't stay there. He returned to Europe from each of his voyages. But behind him came settlers, homesteaders, just as had happened with the first population of the Americas. And in the long run, this was the more important development. The initial point of the spear stuff is celebrated, and rightly so. But the reason that I'm living here in California and that tens of millions of other people are is because the initial exploration was followed by permanent human settlement. If we look at space exploration and the question of whether it's possible for humans to expand beyond the solar system to other stars and on across the galaxy, this distinction between the point of the spear initial exploration and long-term habitation produces some interesting points of view. Most often when we talk about going to the next star over, which is the Alpha Centauri, Proxima Centauri system, a little over 4 light years away, from the standpoint of a hardy astronaut making the first trip, it's pretty daunting. 4 light years is a long way. Suppose you could build a spacecraft and fill it with humans that was capable of accelerating to a velocity of, let's say, 1/10 of 1% the velocity of light. That still takes a lot of energy, and it's potentially dangerous because even at that speed, that's almost 700,000 miles an hour. That's more than 10 times the velocity of the Voyager spacecraft, the fastest that humans have launched from Earth. At that kind of speed, every grain of sand along the path is a potential source of danger. And that's only 0.1% of the speed of light. Expeditions of that sort may well be launched. It wouldn't be surprising if unmanned interstellar probes, very small and light, were launched to other stars. But it's a long way, it's a long time, and it may well be that that's how humans first inhabit other star systems. But there is an alternative, the homesteading alternative. Much slower, but also surer. The space between here and Alpha Centauri is not empty. Along that path, and indeed any path that you take out of the solar system, are trillions of comets. They fall into two basic categories. There is a cometary plane, similar to the plane of the planets, called the Kuiper Belt, that starts beyond the orbit of Neptune. Indeed, what was once thought to be a planet, Pluto, is a Kuiper Belt comet whose orbit has been perturbed so that it sometimes comes inside the orbit of Neptune. Beyond the Kuiper Belt, there's an enormous spherical array called the Oort cloud of comets. It extends out for something like 2 light years. There are at least 1 trillion comets in the Kuiper Belt and many trillions in the Oort cloud. And they're made of materials much like the planets, and they include ice. And ice is hydrogen and oxygen, so comets have materials that you can build and reform things with. You can combine comets to make larger bodies, if you like. And the hydrogen and oxygen there means that you would have water and rocket fuel, if that's still the way folks are getting around. Now, not all humans, or even a majority of humans, want to live on frontiers, but it seems that there will always be some who want and seek and yearn for a frontier, and that's what the realm of the comets, the Kuiper Belt and the Oort cloud, offer to humans of the future, a permanent frontier. Once you get out into the realm of the comets, just beyond the orbit of Neptune, you find that it's not that far from one comet to another. Typical distances are on the order of the distance between the Earth and the Sun. In many areas, it's more like the distance between the Earth and Mars, distances that we already routinely navigate with robotic spacecraft. Moreover, the gravitational well that the sun sits at the center of and that makes it so energy expensive to travel from the Earth, climbing out of that well to outer planets, gets more and more gradual by the time you get to the comets, so that if you are homesteading out in the realm of the comets, and you're the kind of person that starts fretting if civilization catches up too much, you don't like regulations, you don't like law enforcement, or you just like, having places to yourself, there is always going to be more comets available to you, not far away and at a relatively low energy cost to get to them. Now, I'm not talking here about some scenario in which humans are escaping a devastated planet. That's a science fiction scenario, and it hasn't been true in the history of exploration. Columbus didn't come to North America because European society was collapsing. I assume that the explorers who crossed the Bering Strait and first peopled the Americas were not coming here to escape some sort of hideous fate back home. The great Chinese explorations just before Columbus that went into the Indian Ocean and Pacific, and which Joseph Needham, great scholar of Chinese science and technology, believes made contact with humans in South America, on the west coast of South America. They also were being sent forth by a prosperous society, not fleeing some sort of disaster. We don't really know because China was ruled by an emperor who had all power. A new emperor came in, ordered the logbooks of the explorations to be destroyed, and made it a crime to build an ocean-going junk, thus ending the Chinese era of exploration and pretty much guaranteeing that other explorers would cross those waters coming from Europe and ultimately reach China and subject China to a certain amount of humiliation as a result. So giving up exploration is a dangerous course. So what I'm talking about, and I'm building here on an idea originally proposed by the late physicist Freeman Dyson of the Institute for Advanced Study, is the slow migration of generation after generation of humans into the realm of the comets, where they can find a permanent frontier, a place that you can perhaps make money or make a name for yourself, or just have the experience of being free from the legal and social constraints of the inner solar system. Successive generations of humans getting away from the constraints of their own societies to live more freely and more venturesomely, perhaps, out in the realm of the comets, where land will always be cheap, materials will always be cheap, there'll always be opportunities to exploit and build as you see fit. And by the way, by this time, we'll be talking about technologies that are as far beyond what we have today as our current technology today would have been to those intrepid explorers who came down through the Bering Strait more than 15,000 years ago. It's going to be possible to build a lot of things in the outer solar system, and I expect that some humans will be living their whole lives in the realm of the comets, and their descendants will be, some of them prospering in growing communities, others fretting at those restrictions and extending out further into the realm of the comets, until eventually there's a human habitation all the way to the edges of the Oort cloud. And the interesting thing about that is that when you get there, you are halfway to Alpha Centauri. If Alpha Centauri has an Oort cloud of its own, which I suspect it does, then human habitation, not so much exploration, but simply the expanding of human homesteading, could proceed through the Oort cloud of the next star system and might include many generations of humans who never got down to the inner planetary system of Alpha Centauri at all. Similarly, might transit the way you see creatures moving through the canopy of tropical forests without necessarily touching the ground ever. Such explorers could move from star to star and increase the range of human habitation pretty much beyond our current ability to foresee. So my point is simply that there is an alternative method. You don't have to choose one or the other. Humanity as a whole will choose as best it can to explore the wider universe. It's not flags and footprints necessarily. It's not necessarily going to another planetary system, although that may well happen, but rather the kind of slow spread of human population out through the realm of the comets that could in the long run prove to be more important in the way that what's happened here in North America ultimately was decided by the waves of people who settled the Americas, first coming down from the north and later across the Atlantic from Europe and beyond. This might strike you as unlikely. Why would anyone want to live out there? But keep in mind that while we humans might not do it, it's always possible that somebody else out there will. Thanks for listening. See you next time.